everyone, Jesterbell is back, and today I decided to do a little throwback review of when I used to review more comics on this channel, and I decided I would talk about my favorite comic of all time, which is Batman Mad Love. And I've actually never done an official review of it on my channel. I only talked about it a little bit in my top 10 comics video I did a while back. And so today I thought it would be a good time to finally talk about Batman Mad Love and why it means so much to me and why I think the comic is so great. So I first of all, I want to talk about the history behind this comic, which I think is really interesting. That apparently Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, who were two of the biggest creators who worked on Batman the Animated Series, were going to do a they were asked to do a 64-page comic. I think they had already done an annual for Batman Adventures, which was the tie-in comics for Batman the Animated Series. Now, I don't know which came first, if Paul Dini had the idea for Harley Quinn's origin story in his head, or if he knew he was going to do the comic and then just thought of it for that. So, but I think the way it happened is, so for those of you who don't know, Batman Mad Love is the origin story for Harley Quinn, and it's still considered the best story for the character ever. Not hard, but never mind that. It is considered her best comic. Harley's Killing Joke. The Joker's got the Killing Joke, Harley's got Batman Mad Love. So, as I understand, Paul Dini kind of had the workings of Harley's origin in his head, and then he was asked to do a 64-page comic about it as a tie-in to Batman the Animated Series, and he decided it should be this story. Now, what's interesting about the book is it can get away with a little bit more edgier stuff than the animated series did, and I think that's interesting. That I'm not sure if that was a factor in them deciding that this should be a comic first because they thought they could get away with more. I think that's what happened. There's a little epilogue in the book where they talk about that. And so in the book, there's a bit more, because this was eventually made into an episode of the animated series, even though they didn't think that was going to be possible, but the book has a bit more innuendo and has a bit more violence in it, and it's very interesting because it was written back in the earlier days of Batman the Animated Series, where they had a little bit more roundness to the faces of the characters, a little bit more detail in the animation, and it was a little bit more it was a little bit more film noir than the fourth season, the new Batman Adventures of the series, which kind of did the film noir take on Batman, but also made it a little bit more Saturday morning cartoonish because they had a lot more basically shakeups in editorial. I'll just say editorial. The leadership over there, which gave them certain rules for the fourth season. So, getting into Batman Mad Love the comic, you will find actually a very different experience reading this comic than you will just watching the show. I held off reading the comic for a long time because I thought it was identical to the show, but it's not. First of all, yeah, there's a little bit more of a darker edge to it than even the one in the show because they can get away with a little bit more in this comic. And there's much better artwork. I love the artwork in this book. I think that the cartoonishness of it, which I've heard some people say they don't like, is perfect for the story because it's a dark backdrop, a dark story, masked with some very cartoonish drawings, and that really represents Harley's character, someone who's just a mix of tragedy and comedy. So her story in this book, you'll get things that you won't get in the animated show, the Mad Love episode of Batman. You get her actual backstory. You get to hear about how she was always a little bit off her kilter. She had a history as a gymnast, but she wanted to be a psychiatrist, not to help people, but just to kind of exploit people, find people's secrets, and to get rich and famous. And which is why she was interested in Arkham. And she also seduced her professors to get good grades, to get an internship. Very important right now. Back in the day, Harley was not written as a PhD psychiatrist. She was just an intern at Arkham. That's a little detail I don't think people remember. But why is that important? Some people might not like that fact about the character, but for me, this backstory that she was always kind of a bad person kind of gives her a little more agency, more than people realize, because it shows that if she's made bad choices, then those are her choices. She's not just a character that has things happen to her and reacts to them. You know, she makes her own choices, and I think that that's a really key factor, because you're oftentimes seeing just kind of the character flip-flopping between good and bad, and you have people that think that the character is really good at heart and was just manipulated and, you know, has the potential to become a superhero. If you read this version of the comic, and I know there's different versions, it would answer, no, she's always been a bad person, but it's a bit more cautionary, and that's what I like about this. It's a cautionary tale. It's not trying to make her out to be a hero. She's still sympathetic, though, because there's still good aspects to her. She's kind of the hopeless romantic, and it's kind of like, that's where I think people see themselves in the character, where you know, everyone might have that love interest or that obsession, and they just have to have it to be happy, and she's just so hopeless about it, and it's like, we can see ourselves in that, when we can also see the hopelessness of the character, like no one can tell her any different, that she needs to be with Joker, and that then she'll be happy, and she doesn't realize how destructive that is to her. She thinks she's going to be the exception to Joker's destruction, and so that's what makes the character relatable in the midst of just being kind of a bad person, because, you know, everyone has bad inside them, so that's kind of, and maybe people don't like reading about the character because of that. Maybe they see the negative qualities in themselves, and that's why they don't like reading about this very vulnerable, flawed character. So yes, we get to there, and you'll notice with all that I'm talking about, there's just so much going on with her as a character in this graphic novel, and what we don't see now. I just love this story of just a very vulnerable person who's allowed to be a vulnerable character, and who's just kind of allowed to let her obsession just tear her apart, because usually with main female characters, you just get them where they're just idealized, and you never get to read about the female character that falls apart. And that's why I like this story of the female character, flawed from the beginning, still has some good qualities, but ultimately falls apart. It's just very, very human and very interesting to read about. But the book, it has a lot of tragedy in it. It's really, really hard-hitting. There's the scene at the end where Joker kicks her out of the window, and it's very brutal, it's very violent. Sometimes I feel that comics can go overboard with violence, and that it's just not earned, and they're just trying to be edgy. This comic, it really builds up to that point, and it really just hits you. Like, Harley's kind of on a roller coaster where she thinks it's going to be a high, and it's going to, you know, slam her down. And so that's, you know, the build up to that point, and that just really hits the tragedy that this was where it was going to end up. And it's just really sad to see someone just have their, you know, be a romantic and have their heart set on something that's destructive, and then finally see that blow of when it finally hits them. I think that the violence is earned in this comic. It's one of the rare times where it actually is really violent when you talk about it, and I think maybe sometimes I take that for granted when I'm talking about this book. Getting kicked out of the window by your abusive boyfriend, that is horrible stuff, but this book actually builds it up to the point. It goes through all the delusions of the character, it goes through all the horrible things that she's done to get to the point, trying to kill Batman, you know, doing all these horrible things to Gotham City. It goes, but it also goes through, you know, how she's just kind of a ditzy romantic at heart who just kind of wants to, you know, settle down and have somebody have somebody love her in her own twisted way. And so you do still feel the sympathy, but you also feel like, well, yes, it's just, you know, really tragic that this person would do these awful things, have some kind of delusional hope inside them, and then just, you know, fall down as they thought they were going to. So one of the violence in the comic is actually earned, which is why I think that Paul Dini and Bruce Timm actually handled this abusive relationship very well, which is why I'm open to it being portrayed in media. But I understand most people have not read Bruce Timm and Paul Dini's work at this point, and which is very unfortunate. But the comic is not just tragedy, like I said. It's also comedy, because there's a lot. It's not afraid to do dark comedy of the situation either. You know, it kind of makes that kind of quirky feeling of Harley as this intern who just wants to write a book on her patience, and she just gets suckered in by these ridiculous stories that Joker is telling, and they just are completely ridiculous about his past, about how he was like abused as a child, and it's just the way he's telling it. You know it's fake, but she's being suckered into it, and you might think it's about laughing at Harley, because it's just so easy for her to get suckered in. But no, it's able to kind of show you the reality of how people are taken in by manipulation in real life. And this is what happens. Like, when people get into bad relationships, the obvious signs will be there, and you'll be able to see them. Maybe if a friend is getting in that situation, but the person in that situation is not going to be able to see them. They'll have other things blinding them. I've known a lot of friends like that, and I see it in this comic. And I just think that showing kind of the ridiculous, cartoonish nature of how Joker is telling his ridiculous stories and Harley's believing them is a really good way to illustrate how people let themselves be suckered in by that, even though the obvious signs are there, because Joker is telling these stories, making himself out to be a poor, silly victim when you know he's a mass murderer. And that's just really a great representation of, extreme representation of what can happen in real life. So as you can see, there's a lot of relatability in this comic, and I don't know if the writers really realized what they were hitting on, if they were just maybe subconsciously pulling aspects from people they'd known in real life. I know that there was a little bit of that with Paul Dini referencing someone he knew had been in a similar situation, but I feel that the comic already came out brilliant because it so brilliantly related that situation of being suckered into abusive relationships and into obsession. But when you talk about it in interviews, Paul Dini's like, yeah, it was a solid story. He doesn't seem to realize that, everyone else sees it as a masterpiece. Paul Dini just sees it as another good story, go on to the next one. So I'm not sure. I think that maybe he was just injecting his experiences into this book, and he just didn't realize how much it would click with people, because this is like a 2-time winner of Best Comic of the Year award. It has been so influential to so many comic book readers. But, they just talk about it as just another story. But that's really why Batman Mad Love just really connected with people. It's just the relatability of it under the mask of superheroes and dark comedy and all this kind of this fantasy, but it's so entertaining to read, but so human at the same time. I'd 100% recommend it. I disagree with people who think the violence in it was too much. Interestingly, only people now are saying it. I think that the violence is for once earned in this book, and it is only disturbing in a good way to me. There's nothing in this book that makes me say that they didn't need to go there, or that this is just making me sick, I don't want to read this story. It's just interesting to me. It's fascinating to me. So thank you for listening to me talking a little bit about why Batman Mad Love is just such a great comic. You can get it on Kindle or your Apple device for about $5 if you go to the bookstore. And then it's available on Amazon. I have my copy over there. I can see it right now. The reason I would say it's my favorite comic is, once again, that vulnerability of the character, never being able to see that, and seeing a character that's so relatable just for being, on the more vulnerable side in this world of superheroes that are all just so strong. That's why she always stood out to me, and that's why I'm annoyed with trying to make her all about strength and girl power now. Not what she is at all. 5 out of 5 book for me. Yeah, go read it. I've just told you where to go read it. Be sure to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Follow me on Twitter at Teresa Campagna or at Jester Bell Films for updates, and I'll see you next time.